I remember the last time that I interacted with students of Invertis University was back in 2007, when we did a training program there for campus placements, training students for interviews, personality, group discussions. That was way back. But then during those times, it was Invertis College, Invertis Engineering College probably. Now it's become a Invertis University. These are some ground rules to make the webinar more useful for all of you. Please inform people in your house or in your office to not disturb you between this time period of 9:30 a.m. to 11 a.m. Turn silent mode on your phone. Turn off the audio during the Zoom webinar session unless it is needed. Keep a pen and paper or a notebook handy to take any important notes. Feel free to ask questions. I'm here to help you. You can also ask questions after the webinar gets over. You can email me or you can WhatsApp, whatever suits you. You can simply type in your question in the chat box. If I do not get a chance to give you a reply during the webinar, then I'm going to give you the answer after the webinar gets over. I'll email you the answer. You're not being tested, so completely relax and pick up as much of stuff as possible from today's session. We'll have a short 10-minute break around 12 noon, not 12 noon. We'll do it at 10:15 a.m. Please turn on your video so that I get a semblance that there's a training session going on and I can interact with you in a better manner. Plus, look smart and attentive on screen. You're being recorded. We're just waiting for everyone to log in. Once everyone logs in, then we'll start. Okay, I've been informed that all the students have assembled in the seminar hall and you're all viewing from a common screen. In case you have any questions, please type those questions down in the chat box. In case there's a problem with sound or with video, please mention that in the chat box and I'll try to correct that. Also, after this seminar gets over, after this webinar gets over, you all are welcome to ask any questions that you want through the chat box or by simply messaging them to me, or you can email them to me. I'll give you my contact details. Okay, let's start. This is a brief introduction of me, my contact details. I've basically been a teacher and academic product developer. I've been helping students prepare for GMAT, GRE, IMCAT, and the campus placement process since 1994 when I completed my PhD in learning behavior. And I've also been handholding students in the complex admission process for global MBA and MS programs in the USA. My phone number and my email ID are mentioned here for your ease. So whatever question crops up, you can possibly ask those questions after this webinar gets over also. You're welcome to ask any questions. During the webinar also, if there's a doubt somewhere, if there's a query, you can type that query down in your chat box and I'll try to address that. Please take a snapshot or a screenshot. Okay, this is a brief introduction about our organization, which is Ivy League Career Services. It was created in 1994 to bridge the gap between the education which is provided by educational institutions such as schools and colleges and the expertise which is needed to excel in competitive exams, careers, and life. So there's a small gap which we try to address. We basically help students preparing for GMAT, SAT, GRE, IMCAT, and the campus placement process. And we also guide students in the complex application process for admission to premier global MBA programs and undergraduate and postgraduate programs such as MS in the USA through our admission consulting program. The agenda for this session is a huge one. We'll talk about parameters tested during the interview. During a campus placement interview, we'll try to understand how to control what questions the interview panel members are going to ask us. This is the biggest take that you can have from today's session. I'll try to spend the greatest amount of time upon this particular part. If we have time, we'll talk about interview phases, classify them, and talk about the sequence and the purpose behind those phases. We'll also try to get an idea about the games which interviewers or the interview panel members play with you. We look at the difference between the interview conducted by an HR manager and a hiring manager, and what is the basic difference in how they conduct it and what are the objectives behind it. We'll linger a bit upon communication skills, verbal tics, verbal stresses, body language, which is an essential component. We look at some toughest possible questions and how to wriggle out of them. There'll be some special tips of fresh graduates where I try to summarize things. And then we'll also look at long-term preparation for interviews if we get the time. To understand the whole process of interviews and to master it, I think it is better if we reverse the whole logic as such. Instead of thinking about the situation as an interviewee, I want you to think of yourself as a member of the interview panel, to understand why they do certain things and what is the purpose behind all of that. So let's understand what a corporate organization is basically looking for. All corporate organizations, they are looking for people who are team players, who can work in a team, with a group. So they need to be good at interacting with other people. And there has to be a lot of synergy when they are part of a particular team. They're looking for people who are low maintenance, people who do not need to be micromanaged all the time, and they do not need to be instructed about each and every step of their work. They want people who can look at the big picture, not just the work which has been given to them. They want people who are positive and they are dreamers, who are mentally tough, who are very proactive. Instead of being told to do a certain thing, they do that thing themselves. That is what proactivity is all about. They want people who are on an autopilot mode. They do not need to be micromanaged. And people who love doing work themselves. People who love to get their hands dirty. And then there is a technical term which comes from the defense establishments, which is called as completed staff work, which means unless and until one project gets over or one work in hand gets over, they do not pick up another work as such. These people, which corporate organizations are looking for, they have a constructive spirit of discontent. They're never content with their work. They try to keep on improving themselves, taking that extra step which is required for perfection. And these are people who are not lackadaisical. Instead, they're people who love taking challenges. So basically, corporate organizations are looking for people who are leaders, people who are good learners, people who will constantly try to become winners and they win in the end. Now, if you look at emotional state of people before an interview, then there is something called as a Lady Macbeth syndrome, which happens to almost everyone. So let's see what this Lady Macbeth syndrome is. The moment we hear the term interview, most of us get afflicted by this Lady Macbeth syndrome, which means your hands get more sweaty and you keep on rubbing your palms on your thighs in the hope of drying them up before you have to shake the hands of the interview panel members. That nervous dhak, 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 dhak of our hearts, it becomes almost audible to us. And a reason could be that we are more used to paper and pen kind of exams. And here we are being tested verbally by a group of complete strangers who probably can read our minds, and without psychotropic drugs and third-degree torture, they have been able to do this kind of work, which makes them more immaculate. So all it needs is mental preparation by going through a few mock interviews or simulated interviews and learning from them. Rather than believing that the interview panel member is a villain who's out to reject you, believe that he's a long lost uncle who's looking for reasons to select you, and you have to give those reasons to them. Now, why does it really happen? The first reason why this happens is because whenever we take a test, then there's a certain amount of test anxiety which is present in all of us. This test anxiety, if it propels us to work better, it is good. But if this test anxiety is so much that it propels us to work in a worst possible manner, then that is bad. So you need to have a productive test anxiety before any kind of a test. Moreover, an interview is a new method of testing. As I mentioned earlier, you all have a huge amount of practice of last 15 years probably of taking paper and pencil kind of tests. Tests in which you did your hard work, studied from books, made notes, attended classes, and then you spilled out everything in the examination hall based upon what questions were asked. But here in an interview, this is a newer method of testing, which is more verbal in nature. That is something which causes something called as xenophobia to us. Xenophobia is fear of the unknown, and this is a pretty unknown area for all of us. Another problem is, so far all the testing that had been done was testing done upon a certain syllabus, which was based upon knowledge nuggets, and you could work hard to learn all answers. An interview is the first test that you're going to have, which is based upon you as a person. Nobody has ever asked you questions about your own self. And an interview is basically about questions which are based upon you as a subject. Another reason why a lot of tension happens is because of something called as a pedestal syndrome. So what is pedestal syndrome? When people enter an interview room and they look at the interview panel members, then they normally put all of those interview panel members on a high pedestal, thinking they're great, and they will decide our careers. And whenever you put somebody on a very high pedestal, on a very high stand, then automatically you'll have to crane your neck to look at them, and you will not behave in a normal possible manner. So as I mentioned earlier, the method is that you should not put the interview panel members on a pedestal. Instead, you should all go in for thinking of them as somebody who's elder to you, somebody who has more experience, somebody who's more avuncular or uncle-like, but their basic purpose why they've come to your campus is they've come to select students. They've come to select people to join their teams. So if that is a positive note on which you would treat your interview, then you'll end up getting a better response. A lot of students also have apprehensions about being asked questions during an interview for which they may not have an answer. So the solution is you prepare those answers. You beforehand think about whatever possible questions can be asked, and you go in for preparing for all of those questions. Now, the negative feelings that you have, are they justified before an interview? Remember that the written exam or the aptitude test is basically a screening process to weed out the non-serious lot of students. While interviews and group discussions, they're basically for selecting the best lot out of all of you. So start on a positive note. If you've cleared the written examination stage or the aptitude test, the work given to the interview panel members is not to reject you. They're given the task to select a certain number of students for their jobs that await them from your campus. So is their work become one of the people who are part of their list as such. The interview is going to be focused on your strengths, and it will not be focused upon your weaknesses. It is your job to keep it more focused upon your strengths. Think of it more like a sales process. Treat the whole person interview like a sales process. If you have to sell a bike, will you talk about its fuel efficiency and how quickly it reaches a speed of 100 kilometers per hour? Or will you talk about absence of an air conditioner while riding a bike? You will never even mention that. So that is what you have to take care of. So during the interview, remember, you have to focus upon positives, and you have to not bother about the negatives. You don't even have to stress upon them. The responsibility or the onus of focusing the interview upon your positives is something which is on you. Now, let's look at another aspect. Leading an interview. Wouldn't you all like that the interview panel members ask you questions which you want them to ask? That whole process is called as leading an interview. Now, interviewers, when they ask you questions, they can ask you two types of questions. They can either ask you open-ended questions, or they can ask you close-ended questions. So what are these close-ended and open-ended questions? If interview panel members ask you pointed questions, which can be answered narrowly in a word or two, say, would you like to have tea or coffee? Then these are called as close-ended questions. They can have only one answer. Let's take another close-ended questions. Suppose you have downloaded an XML data and there are 100 parameters to the overall score. Then can a correlation between a parameter and the overall score be used to assign subjective weightage to each parameter? Now you either have an answer to this kind of a question or you don't have it. This is an example of a close-ended question. The other type of questions are called as open-ended questions, which allow you to talk about almost everything you want. These answers and these questions come in many shapes and sizes and packages. An example could be, how do you handle yourself when you're having a conflict with someone? Are you a confrontational person? Do you avoid that person? Why? How do you think you'll behave when you have a problem with somebody who's a co-worker of yours? So there's a very thin, hazy line which separates these two type of questions, and this hazy line can be breached from either of the sides. You need to have the practice of converting a close-ended question into an open-ended question. That is where your abilities really count. Now, if I talk about initiation of an interview, then interviews normally get initiated by an open-ended question. They'll ask you something like, introduce yourself, or they'll say, tell us something about yourself, or take us through your CV. All of these are open-ended questions. Now, the reason behind this is to make you more comfortable so that you can reflect your true potential. Interview panel members understand that the candidates are under a lot of pressure and they may be suffering from a performance syndrome. So the candidate has to be put at ease. And once that ice breaks, then you can open up and you can show your true potential and they can assess you in a better manner. If an interview has a component of stress, a stress component, then that is something which can be taken down at later stage. That is what they believe in. So let's look at interview initiation. When they ask you for introducing yourself, what are the things that you can possibly talk about? You can possibly talk about your name, you can talk about your academic background, you can talk about your family background, qualities, activities, strengths and weaknesses, your value system, your hobbies, interests, extracurricular activities, your passions, achievements, your likes and dislikes, the career path that you have in mind, your career objective. But remember one thing very clearly, that whatever you're talking about during your introduction, the more you talk about a particular thing, the more would be questions which will come upon that particular area. If you do not mention a particular thing, there's a rare chance that a question will be asked about that area. So whenever you mention something during your introduction, try to ask yourself, how does mentioning this particular thing add value to me? And what kind of questions is this particular thing going to lead to? For example, if let's just take the example of the name being mentioned. When you all have been comfortable so far with introducing yourself to perfect strangers. So whenever you introduce yourself to a perfect stranger, you normally start with your own name and then you talk about other things which may be relevant to that particular context. Even during an introduction given during the interview, a name would be something that most of you would be comfortable with speaking. But the problem is the interview panel members already know your name. So unless and until you can add value to yourself, there's no need to really utter your name. Suppose your name is Dhamini. So you could start with saying, my name is Dhamini, which basically means self-controlled or a priestess. And the name is brushed off on my nature as well. I'm good at interpersonal skills and I'm very composed during pressure. If you're talking about family background, then this could be the next thing that you could possibly follow. If you can say honestly that you come from a well-educated family, which makes you pursue a B.Tech program, then you are selling your strong roots in education. If you come from a family where you are the first person to pursue a professional course, then it also shows that as compared to others, you had to face more challenges during your education. So far, facing these challenges would have made you more determined and hardworking as compared to others, but you will have to speak it out. You will have to speak out how your family background makes you better if you're mentioning the term family background during your introduction. When you have to lead an interview, remember, you need to be very clear about understanding what are your strong areas on which you would like the questions to be asked and what are your weak areas on which you would not like questions to be asked. So try to identify 5 strong areas. Music could be an example. I'm not saying the whole interview is going to be focused upon music if you mention that to a great extent. You also have to worry about 5 weak areas that you possibly have. Try to solve those 5 weak areas. But remember, whatever are your 5 strong areas, you need to constrict them. You have to take care that you open smaller windows and you do not open big, wide doors as such. For example, if you say music is my area of interest, during your introduction, then a problem which can come is that they can ask you how is C minor different from E major. You need to be ready for that. They'll ask you how does one gharana of Indian music differ from another gharana of Indian music. So be very specific about what is your strong area and keep it as specific and narrow as possible. Moreover, as far as your weak areas are concerned, you need to widen them and think about what you're going to do to make them solvable as such. So in case a question is asked from your weak area, you need to be ready to answer those questions as well. So during the process of leading the interview, remember, there are 5 broad things which are really important. Those 5 important things are, you need to be very comfortable with the idea of the interview by taking a certain number of mock interviews, getting feedback, improving upon it, working upon that feedback, and then becoming better with each and every mock interview as such. You need to understand what are the 2 types of questions and how you can switch one question type into another. You also have to understand that whenever you get a window of opportunity, you need to talk about your strong areas and try to spend a greater amount of time on them. During the process of the interview, remember, you need to smile more constantly. You need to show a certain amount of wit, which shows your confidence. And whatever you are mentioning, try to add anecdotes, stories, and examples to prove that particular point. That is something which gives more life to your interview as such. Also, do not suffer from pedestal syndrome. Do not give too high a position to the interview panel members. Otherwise, you may end up not showing your true potential as such. Never interrupt or finish a sentence for an interviewer. There are a lot of students who get very impatient during an interview, and they will not wait for the interview panel member to complete the question. The interview panel member is somewhere in the middle of a sentence, and they will quickly, out of their anxiousness, complete the sentence. That is a very irritating thing for a lot of interview panel members. Also, interview panel members will normally be older than you, and they will be more patient as compared to you, and they will be thinking while they're asking you a question. That is the reason why they may end up asking you a question at a very slow pace, less number of words coming out of their mouth per second. Bear with that. Smile. Start giving the world the cutest and the most endearing smiles. I tend to think of them as shy and sweet smiles. It is your critical success factor, and you have to work upon it consistently. You need to stand in front of the mirror, take a few selfies to get an idea about what kind of a smile you have and how can you smile in a manner which is more acceptable to people. It should not be a grin. It should not look like a smile or the plasticky smile of air hostesses. That is very irritating. Also, try to pepper your interviews with a lot of examples, anecdotes, compelling stories. All of these examples, anecdotes, and stories, they make you a real person with experiences, and the panel members, they connect with you in a better manner, and they will remember you because of that. These examples, anecdotes, and compelling stories need to be worked upon. They have to be weaved during your answers of the interview. Remember, in terms of soft skills, outcome of the interview is decided in the first 5 minutes. What happens in the next half an hour or 1 hour of the interview is basically to reinforce the impression that have already been made in the first 5 minutes. So let's understand it. I'm going to speak it in Hindi also. पहले 5 मिनट में आपका जो भी impression है किसी भी interview panel member के ऊपर, that impression is something which continues throughout the interview. अगर पहले 5 मिनट के अंदर किसी interview panel member ने आपको select कर लिया mentally, तो उसके बाद अगर आपने कोई गलती की तो वो गलती उनको बड़ी गलती नहीं लगेगी. उनके दिमाग में ये होगा कि हाँ, इतनी गलती तो हर कोई करता है. If you do something which is positive during the rest of the interview, then they will think, see, this is the reason why I like this guy. So whatever impressions are created in the first 5 minutes of the interview, they are very important, and rest of the time of the interview is basically used by all interview panel members. They're basically humans. They reinforce the impression or whatever category they put you into, selected or not selected. Whatever you do in the rest of the interview has less amount of impact. If in the first 5 minutes of the interview, they have mentally rejected you and they do not like you and they do not click with you, then even if you do wonderful things at a later part during the interview, it will not have a very positive impact. If you make a mistake in the later part of the interview, then they will think, see, this is the reason why I rejected this guy mentally in the first 5 minutes. So you never get a second chance to make the first impressions. Understand that very clearly. In the first 5 minutes, if I'm taking your interview, I will note certain critical aspects. Rest of your answers are going to reinforce my views further. So what all can happen in the first 5 minutes? In the first, when you interact with somebody, you may have realized that there are some people, they do not do anything good to you, even then you like them. And there are other people who, despite doing good things to you, and they've never done anything wrong, which works against you, you still dislike them. Most of the times, the reason behind that is the body language of that particular guy. When little babies cry, say after the age of 1 day. When a 1-day-old baby cries, it realizes that although I'm capable of doing 3-4 things, but whenever I cry, people give me more attention. People come cuddle me. I get fed. My clothes are changed. If the room is uncomfortable, then somebody turns on the AC, etc. As a result, children realize that crying is a signal to everyone else that I want attention. Some people use this body language signal throughout their lives, crying, and they try to get attention by crying more. So this oral region, whatever is done through this, is something which is the first way you communicate with the world, and it works. It helps you. It is the reason why you are alive now. Children who do not cry, do not get a lot of attention, they are less healthy, and people care about them less. This is also an observed fact as such. So let's talk about why is oral region important for you during the interview. You must have observed that when a 1-2-year-old baby speaks a lie, the first thing which they do is they cover up their face like this. Why? Because in this nasooral region, whenever you tell a lie, there is a small itch which happens here. Itch, एक खुजली होती है यहाँ पर, उसको हमें scratch करना जरूरी होता है. As a result, children, whenever they tell a lie, they will always cover their face like this, as if they are ashamed of their lying. As you grow older, then you become more polished, and you stop covering your face like this after you've told a lie. But you still do certain things. For example, you will still have that urge. So to touch your nose or touch your lips or do something different from your lips, use your lips in a different manner. That is an indicator that you're lying. The problem is that the same itch which happens in this region whenever you lie is an itch which happens here whenever you are not confident, whenever you don't have an answer to certain questions. Suppose you're not confident during an interview, and while giving your answers, you touch your nose or you touch your some area here, then you are also giving a hidden signal to the interview panel members that you are possibly telling lies. So even if you're giving the right answer, your body language signals are wrong. So take care that during your interview, you do not touch this area. This area should not be touched. Remember, there was a particular actor by the name of Manoj Kumar. A better method is to accost strangers on the street and ask them for directions of a particular place. And while you're asking those questions with that particular person, lock your eyes into that person's eyes. That is one excellent way. Stress upon. The first is, we always like people who are like us. This is the best way to connect with people. So no matter how good you look on paper in your resume, no matter how well you present yourself, no matter how well you answer, you will not get the job unless you make a personal connection with the interviewer. I need to know right from the start that you're someone I can trust to represent my company and me. How do you establish that trust? Let's straight away move on to things which you all have to do very properly. Now, in the few days that you have, you need to take more mock interview sessions and look at the feedback which has been given to you and work upon that feedback, whatever feedback has been given to you. But if that feedback, would have some positive, that feedback would have some negatives also. Do not get tense when you get negative feedback after an interview. And normally, very strong negative feedback should not be given after a mock interview session. Whatever feedback has been given to you, work upon it. Try to see how can I convert my positive feedback into more positive feedback. How can I decrease my negative feedback? During this whole process, you need to have a learning attitude and get more comfortable with the idea of taking interviews. There are a lot of interviews of students available online. Go to YouTube and watch other people's interviews. And when you see a lot of these interviews happening, you will start getting anxious in a positive manner. You will start thinking, agar main iski jagah pe hota, to main ye wala answer deta. That spirit is required during your interviews. I've been asked, sir, while keeping all these things, we make blunder of flung in our interview because our mind would be stuck in that only. How are we sitting? Itna sochna bhi nahi hai. संस्कृति इतना नहीं सोचना है कि हमें एग्जैक्टली ऐसे बैठना है, ऐसे हाथ लगाने हैं, एक बार ऐसे अपने पाम्स दिखाने होंगे, थोड़े जेस्चर्स करने हैं, इतना नहीं सोचना. नेचुरल वे में करना है. इसलिए मॉक इंटरव्यूज होते हैं. मॉक इंटरव्यूज का पर्पस ये है कि हम समझ पाए कि नेचुरली जो हम काम करते हैं वो ठीक है या नहीं है। अगर वो ठीक नहीं है तो उसको थोड़ा चेंज करना पड़ेगा, और अगर हम ठीक कर रहे हैं तो उसके बारे में फिक्र नहीं करनी है। Then Manya has asked how to express answers correctly and what should be the correct tone. The way you speak, with a certain amount of respect, as if you're trying to explain things to make the other person understand. That should be the tone that you should have. How long should we introduce ourselves? Yes, good question. 2 minutes. When the first question is asked, take us through your CV or introduce yourself, tell us something about yourself, then that answer to that question has to last about 1.5 to 2 minutes. और उस 1.5 to 2 minutes में आप जो कुछ बोलते हैं, जिस भी टॉपिक के बारे में ज्यादा बोलेंगे उसके बारे में ज्यादा क्वेश्चंस पूछे जाएंगे आपसे। जिस चीज के बारे में कम बोलेंगे उसके बारे में कम क्वेश्चंस पूछे जाएंगे। जिस चीज के बारे में कुछ नहीं बोलेंगे, most probably there will be no questions upon that particular area. So you'll have to be very careful to prepare that pitch of yours, that sales pitch. You all have my contact details. Please feel comfortable asking me questions by WhatsApping your questions or by sending an email. If you really feel comfortable, you can even make a phone call. Don't worry. Time's up, guys. It was wonderful interacting with all of you. I'm going to stop sharing. Niketan Sagar says, everyone, thank you, sir. Pray. Yes, I'm praying for all of you guys. I'm praying for the success of all of you. Thank you. You're all welcome. You're welcome. Now I'm showing my honesty. You're all welcome by showing my open palm. Thanks for being a wonderful audience, all of you. Be comfortable, be yourself.